Hey guys, John here. Today we're in Vital, and this patch is a sequence called Industrial Screech. Alright, so let's get into this here. By itself, this patch would sound something kind of like this, with our macros being cutoff, resonance, screech, and the effects. And then our traditional effects as we saw down here, which we can turn this off down here, and it's kind of dry. Okay, so let's get into this here. So let's go to our effects panel. Let's turn all of these off here. And then over here in the voice section, we're going to be using all three of these oscillators as well as the sample engine over here, or the sample oscillator. So basically this first oscillator here, we're going to be using the init saw wave. And there's a couple things with this oscillator here. So we're going to be adding 5 voices of unison and then bringing the detune from 20 down to 14. And then also on this knob here, we have the harm stretch selected here. And that's kind of going to be the secret sauce, or not really not so secret, but it's going to be the sauce that makes the screech, right? And that's going to be on all 3 of these oscillators here. So moving on from that, there's kind of 2 interesting things happening. So we're modulating the level here with an LFO1, which is this guy over here. Kind of giving that ARP sound, but it's technically going to be a sequence. And just so you know here, this LFO1 is going to be 2 saw waves downwards, but there's a slight little difference here. The first one is basically linear at full amplitude, and the second one I brought down just a little bit and then grabbed the center node and kind of just brought that up a little bit, because we want a little bit of variation. It's going to be so repetitive, right? So we want some kind of rhythm to that. And then also down here on the stereo, which is a very nice feature in Vital, it's changed a little bit to the right at about 0.071, just get a little bit difference there. And then last but not least for this oscillator here, if we look on this keyboard panel and we select this here, we have this first little node here selected, which is basically going to be our root node that we play. So it's basically going to be bouncing up octaves. And the way we achieve that here, so we're going to be grabbing that LFO1 and we're going to be dropping it on this tuning here. So an important part, if you're ever going to be modulating different types of pitch with this kind of thing, the modulation amount is very important here. So if you look over here, this is going to be LFO2 and it's going to be at 12. So take a look at LFO2 here. This is basically just going to be a square wave, right? So it's on and then it's off. So we're bringing this over here to the pitch and it's basically just bouncing between one value and the other value, right? So what we need to do is we need to tell Vital that we want to go up 1 octave. So that's why we'd right click this macro, go into enter value, and then here I have 12. So for 12 semitones or 1 octave. So that's how we know it's going to be bouncing between 1 octave. So let's say, for example, we want to go 2 octaves. So we go enter value and we would put 24. And then we get those higher pitch there as well. So it's kind of nice to just kind of think how many octaves you want to go, and then you have to just do a little bit of math. It's not too bad, but if you want to do 1 octave, we'll do 12. And that's going to be the same concept for basically all the other oscillators here. So this one is going to be no change in the main pitch or no change in the fine pitch there. So that's basically the first oscillator. The second one's slightly different. We're going to be using the basic shapes on a square kind of pulse-ish wave here. This is going to be at, I guess, frame 160.7 for basic shapes. Let's turn off oscillator 1 here. So this one is going to be down 1 octave. We're just using 1 voice, and the detune doesn't really matter because we're just using 1 voice here. And the same concept applies for the level here. We're going to be using LFO1 as well, same that we saw over here with the 2 saw waves, but we're not going to be using it to full maximum amplitude, because here we're using it for a total of 1, right? So we're using the entire level knob for the first oscillator, and this is kind of where you want to mix the different oscillators, how loud it's going to be all together. So for the second oscillator, it's going to be 0.811. And the same concept again here for the pitch. We're selecting the first root note, and then, you know, for the modulation here, it's going to be 12, so 12 semitones, and same thing as LFO2, which is that square wave. And all of these are going to be going to filter number 1. So moving on from there, oscillator number 3 is again another init saw wave. But this one is going to be up 1 octave here, and there's going to be 8 voices of unison, and then the detune is going to be 11. And same concept again, we're also using LFO1 to modulate the level, but this one at 0.540. So then with all these 3 together, it's going to be something like this. So we're kind of covering a good amount of ground, right? So we have the first oscillator was kind of holding our main pitch, or kind of our mid-range, and then we have the octave down and then the octave up. So we're covering quite a lot of territory. And then last but not least, I kind of wanted to solo the sample engine here. Now this is kind of just giving us a little bit extra flavor, a little bit extra sound to work with and to get to kind of go through the filter, make it sound a little bit cooler. So this is basically just selected on the white noise, and the same thing with the level here. We're using LFO1 at 0.556. And depending on how you want this to sound, you can always drag this macro down a little higher, a little lower, depending on how loud you want that in the mix. And again, going to filter number 1. Okay, so now let's enable all of these oscillators here. So now together with all 4, it's going to be something like this. So next up, this is going to be going into the filter. So all of them are going into filter number 1. We're going to be using the ladder 12 dB. The cutoff manually is going to be set around 373.2 hertz. And then this is going to have 2 different macros here, or 2 different modulations. The first one being LFO1, right? This shape over here, which is kind of following the on and off. And that value is going to be 32. And then the next modulation is going to be the macro, which is this guy over here, depending on where we actually want to set it, right? So at the very bottom here, which I said is going to be like 373.2, that's going to be the lowest value. Then all the way to the top, it's going to be kind of somewhere over here. So kind of where this is bouncing is going to be our main range. So we are going to be using some drive for this filter here because it sounds kind of cool, 11.26 dB, and then the key tracking a little bit at 63.85. And then before we go into the effects here, something to keep in mind is that we are using this as a monophonic type of sound, right? Because we don't really want to hit a lot of chords because there's going to be delays. It's going to be kind of fast moving. It can get really dirty really fast, not in a good way. And the voices are going to be at 1 here. And then we're using a little bit of glide just to kind of make it a little bit nice, bringing up this slope, kind of making it a little bit more convex, I guess you would call it. And then glide's going to be at 0.052 seconds. So it's a very, very, very subtle effect right over there. Okay, so now moving on to our effects here. So the first thing that we're going to hit it with is going to be the multiband. Now this one's kind of interesting because once we pop this on here, we're kind of just mixing these different bands here to kind of tailor our sound to how we want it. So it's very up to taste. For me, I kind of brought up a little bit of the lows, kind of compressing a little bit of the mids here, and then brought up a little bit of the highs. And now this is where it gets interesting. So we have the delay popped on right over here. Now this is something I really like doing once we have 2 different types of delays. So right over here we have 1/8, and then over here on the right we have 1/16. The mode is going to be on ping pong. The feedback amount is going to be 31.75. The mix, as you can see, it's down. However, we do have this on a macro, so it's kind of weird how it looks here that it's down, but it's actually going to be up here because it's on macro number 4 at 0.11 or 0.177. The cutoff over here is going to be 75.60. The spread is going to be 0.339. And a patch like this really screams like it needs some distortion. So let's pop on this distortion here with soft clip. So we have the soft clip enabled here. The drive is going to be 7.427 dB. And then the mix, like I said, it looks like it's down, but it's kind of like all the way to the top here with our macro because it has 1 influence. And then we have an EQ over here. We're going to be bringing down these mids kind of a little bit lower because they kind of get muddy and they kind of get gross towards that area. And then bringing up the highs with a nice high shelf right there. Last but not least, we have a reverb. So the high cut over here is going to be at about 4,698 hertz. Didn't touch the low cut really. It's going to be at 8, which doesn't really matter. The cutoff here is going to be 8.175 hertz, core amount 5%, delay 0, mix. Funny enough, it says 0, but once you press the key, it's going to be really at 25%. The time is going to be 1 second, the size 50%, chorus frequency 0.250 hertz, and then the gain is going to be at 0. Yeah, so that's this patch in a nutshell. Nothing too crazy here. It is kind of using all the oscillators, a filter. But yeah, so if you'd like to get this patch for free, there's a link in the video description below, and you can download it and use it if you would like to. So hopefully you learned something. Thanks for watching. We're going to play this out with Industrial Screech. Here we go.